Sarah Johnson discovered that a millionaire donated blood to save her 7-year-old son and took an unexpected action. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. 2. The alarm clock rang at 5 in the morning as always. Sarah stretched her arm lazily, silencing the metallic noise echoing through the small 2-bedroom apartment in a suburb of Chicago. It had been 15 years waking up at the same time, 15 years wearing the same white lab coat, 15 years walking the cold corridors of Chicago General Hospital. "Mom, are you going to work already?" The sleepy voice of Ethan, her 7-year-old son, reached her from the next room. The boy was wrapped in a faded blue blanket, his brown hair sticking out in all directions, his eyes still puffy from sleep. "It's still early, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." Sarah approached the bed and kissed her son's warm forehead. "Aunt Linda will come to pick you up for school, okay?" Ethan nodded, but his eyes already showed that characteristic paleness that had been intensifying in recent weeks. Sarah felt her heart tighten. She knew it wasn't just fatigue. The blood tests from the previous week confirmed her suspicions. Ethan's blood condition was worsening. The apartment smelled of brewed coffee and bagels. Sarah had prepared the morning coffee before Ethan even woke up. It was her daily ritual, an attempt to maintain some normalcy amidst the chaos of raising a child alone while dealing with her own emotional exhaustion. On the fridge, stuck with cartoon character magnets, were the results of the latest tests, numbers she had memorized and that haunted her during night shifts. "Sarah, you can't carry the world on your shoulders," Aunt Linda used to say, her closest friend, a 60-year-old woman who took care of Ethan when necessary. "God doesn't give us a burden greater than we can bear." But Sarah doubted that. Sometimes, lying in bed after 12-hour shifts, she wondered if she was really strong enough. If she was a good mother, if Ethan deserved something better, a complete family, private health insurance, treatments she could never afford. The bus to the hospital was crowded, as always. Sarah squeezed between construction workers, college students, and other healthcare professionals. The 40-minute morning commute was her moment of mental preparation. She looked out the window at the simple houses, the bakeries already open, the stray dogs wandering the cobblestone streets, and tried to find strength for another day. Chicago General Hospital was not the most modern in the state, but Sarah considered it her second home. Built in the 80s, the 4-story building served a population of nearly 500,000 people. The light green walls already showed signs of peeling, the elevators were often broken, and the hallways always echoed with a mix of worried conversations, crying babies, and the constant noise of medical equipment. "Good morning, Sarah," greeted Dr. Richard Miller, the pediatrician in charge of the department where she worked. A man in his 50s with perpetually tousled grey hair and thick-rimmed glasses. "How is Ethan?" "He needs more transfusions," Sarah replied, adjusting her badge on her lab coat. "His hemoglobin levels have dropped again." Dr. Richard made a worried expression. He had been following Ethan's case for 3 years since the rare blood condition was diagnosed. "We'll reschedule the tests for next week." "And Sarah," he hesitated, "you know there's an experimental protocol in Illinois that could help Ethan, right?" Sarah lowered her eyes. She did know. She also knew that the treatment cost over $50,000 a month, an impossible amount for a nurse who earned just over $3,000 a month. "I know, doctor. But for now, let's stick with what we have, okay?" The shift began like any other. Sarah distributed medications, checked vital signs, comforted anxious mothers, assisted doctors in procedures. Her colleagues respected her deeply. In 15 years, she had never missed a day of work, never complained about overtime, never lost patience with difficult patients. "Sarah is an angel," Mrs. Thompson, a cleaning assistant who had worked at the hospital for 20 years, used to say. "I've never seen anyone care for others with so much love." It was true. Sarah had a natural gift for calming frightened children, for finding the right words for desperate parents, for being present in the most difficult moments. But inside she felt fragmented. How could she care so well for other people's children when she sometimes doubted her own abilities as a mother? During lunch breaks, Sarah often sat in the small internal garden of the hospital. It was a modest space, a few concrete benches surrounded by palm trees, and a flower bed that the nurses voluntarily maintained. There, eating her ham and cheese sandwich, she watched the families waiting for news about their loved ones. "Nurse Sarah?" A girl of about 10 approached timidly. It was Lily, a pediatric patient, hospitalized for 2 weeks with respiratory issues. "Can you stay with me during the injection? I'm scared." Sarah smiled and extended her hand to the girl. "Of course, Princess. Let's go together." Moments like this reminded Sarah why she had chosen to be a nurse. Since she was little, when she played at caring for injured dolls, she felt an almost instinctive need to alleviate others' suffering. Perhaps it was because she herself knew pain well. She had grown up without a father, raised by a grandmother who made homemade sweets to sell and support the family. When the shift ended at 7 in the evening, Sarah followed her usual ritual, stopping by the hospital pharmacy to check for any free vitamin samples she could take to Ethan, then walking to the bus stop, always. Sarah was attentive to the movements on the street. The suburb of Chicago was not a violent place, but a woman alone needed to be cautious. On the bus ride home, she closed her eyes and allowed herself to dream, as she did every night. She dreamed of a future where Ethan was completely healed, where she could afford college for her son, where she wouldn't have to choose between buying medicine or food. Upon arriving home, she found Ethan at the kitchen table, doing his homework under the supervision of Aunt Linda. "Mom, today I learned about oceans at school." Ethan ran to hug her, but Sarah noticed he was more breathless than usual. "Really? Tell me all about it while we have dinner." As she warmed up the leftover beans from the night before and fried some eggs, Sarah watched her son excitedly describe the sea creatures he had discovered in his school books. Ethan had always been a curious, intelligent child, full of dreams. And that was what hurt Sarah the most, the feeling that she couldn't give him all the opportunities he deserved. That night, after putting Ethan to bed and telling him a story about adventurous pirates, Sarah sat at the kitchen table and opened the month's bills. Electricity, water, gas, Ethan's private school. She insisted on keeping him in a good school, even if it meant tightening the budget even more. Medicine, food. The numbers never added up, as always. But Sarah was a woman of faith. Every night before going to sleep, she thanked for having the health to work, for Ethan being alive, for having a roof over their heads. And she asked for strength for another day, because deep down, despite all the difficulties, she knew her love for Ethan was greater than any obstacle. She was an imperfect mother, a dedicated nurse, a hard-working woman. And the next day at 5 in the morning, the alarm would ring again, and she would start all over again, carrying in her heart the hope that someday, somehow, everything would be all right. It was a typical March Monday when Sarah first noticed the man. The late summer heat in Illinois made the hospital corridors even more stuffy, and the old air conditioning system struggled to maintain a reasonable temperature. Sarah was organizing the files at the pediatric reception when she noticed a different figure in the waiting room. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, with brown hair and a few gray strands at the temples, wearing a wrinkled light blue dress shirt and faded jeans. Nothing about him suggested wealth or status. He looked more like an ordinary worker waiting to be seen, but there was something in his dark eyes, a quiet intensity that caught her attention. "Excuse me." He approached the counter where Sarah was working, speaking in a slow, deep voice. "I would like to register as a blood donor." Sarah looked up from the papers and studied him more closely. The man had a chiseled face, with some wrinkles around his eyes that suggested a life filled with worries, and on his right wrist, a scar similar to the one she herself had, the result of a rare surgery she had undergone in childhood. "You need to go to the blood bank on the 2nd floor," Sarah informed him politely. "They do all the tests and the registration there." "Thank you." He smiled briefly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just one more question. Do you treat children with rare blood conditions here?" Something in his tone made Sarah feel a chill in her stomach. Yes, we do. Why? Just curiosity. I have a very specific blood type. Maybe I can help someone. The man stepped away, and Sarah was left with a strange feeling. During her 15 years at the hospital, she had developed a keen intuition about people, and something about that stranger made her uneasy, although she couldn't explain why. 2 weeks later, Dr. Richard sought out Sarah with a look of surprise and relief. "Sarah, we have good news about Ethan," he said, adjusting his glasses. "A donor with a perfect match has come forward. Exact blood type, all markers matching. It's almost a miracle." Sarah's heart raced. "Who is it? Can I meet him to thank him?" He asked to remain anonymous for now, but he said he can come in to donate whenever necessary. Sarah felt tears of gratitude in her eyes. For months she had prayed for a solution, and now it seemed her prayers had been answered. Ethan's first transfusion was scheduled for the following Thursday. Sarah managed to switch her shift to be with her son during the procedure. Ethan was nervous, gripping her small, warm hand. "Mom, is it going to hurt a lot?" he asked, looking at the needle the nurse was preparing. "No, my love. It's just a quick little prick. And this blood will make you stronger, like a superhero." That was when she saw him again. The same man from the reception was sitting in a chair at the back of the room, a blood bag being collected from his arm. He was watching Ethan with an indescribable expression, a mix of affection and melancholy. When their eyes met, the man gave a discreet nod. Sarah approached after Ethan fell asleep during the transfusion. "Are you the donor?" she asked softly. He nodded. "How is he?" "And better every day, thanks to you." Sarah hesitated. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know us." The man was silent for a few seconds, watching Ethan sleep. "Sometimes we do things because we need to, not because we understand." After that enigmatic conversation, the man began to appear regularly at the hospital. Always modest, always silent, always with that strong coffee aroma that accompanied him. Sarah discovered that his name was Edward Smith and that he came to the hospital every 2 weeks to donate. What intrigued Sarah the most was how Edward seemed genuinely interested in Ethan's well-being. He always asked about the boy's progress, how school was going, if he needed anything. And gradually, he began to bring small gifts. "Here's something for him," said Edward on a Tuesday, pulling a colorful children's book from the bag. "It's about adventures at sea. I thought he would like it." Ethan was delighted with the book. It was a story about a boy who traveled across the oceans in search of lost treasures. The illustrations were beautiful, and the quality of the paper indicated it wasn't cheap. "Thank you so much, Mr. Edward, but you didn't have to," said Sarah, genuinely touched. "He reminds me of someone," was all Edward replied. In the following weeks, Edward brought more books, all with maritime themes. Stories of pirates, ships, and creatures from the deep sea. Ethan devoured each one, asking Sarah to read aloud before bed. What caught Sarah's attention the most was the watch Edward wore. It was an old model with a golden face and a silver chain. Every time the fluorescent light in the hospital hit it, the metal shone almost hypnotically. "What a beautiful watch," Sarah commented one time. Edward looked at his wrist and gently touched the glass of the watch. "It belonged to my father. It's one of the few things I have left of him." Sarah felt a strange pang in her chest. Something in Edward's voice, the way he spoke about his father, resonated with her own story of orphanhood. One day, while Ethan was doing some breathing exercises recommended by the doctor, Edward sat next to Sarah in the waiting room. "Can I ask a personal question?" he said hesitantly. "Of course. Did you know your father?" The question caught Sarah off guard. "No, he died before I was born. Why?" Edward was quiet for a moment, seeming to measure his words. "Just curious. Ethan is lucky to have a mother like you." Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "Thank you. Sometimes I feel like I'm not enough for him." "Don't say that." Edward's voice grew firmer. "The love you have for him is evident. Any child would be blessed to have a mother like you." There was something in the way Edward spoke, an almost desperate certainty, that made Sarah wonder if he had children. But whenever she tried to learn more about his personal life, he changed the subject. Ethan was visibly better. The regular transfusions had returned color to his face and energy to his movements. He was back to playing in the schoolyard, running through the hallways at home and asking 1,000 questions about everything he saw. "Mom, can I ask something to Uncle Edward?" Ethan said on a Thursday after one of the transfusions. "Which Uncle Edward, sweetheart?" "The one who brings the books. He seems sad sometimes. I want to know if he has kids to play with." Ethan's innocence touched Sarah deeply. At 7 years old, he already showed an uncommon empathy, an ability to perceive the emotions of others that impressed the adults around him. That night, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about Edward. Who was that man really? Why had he chosen Ethan to help? And why did he always seem to carry such deep sadness in his eyes? She decided that on the next visit, she would try to learn more about the mysterious benefactor who had changed their lives. Because a growing intuition told her that Edward Johnson held secrets that could be important for her and Ethan. The shining watch, the similar scars, the questions about her father. Everything felt like pieces of a puzzle that Sarah still couldn't put together. But she sensed she was about to discover something that would change everything. It was a rainy Friday in April when Sarah made the discovery that would change everything. Ethan was flipping through the latest book that Edward had brought, The Treasure of Captain Redbeard, when an old photograph slipped out from between the pages and fell to the floor. "Mom, look." Ethan picked up the photo and showed it to Sarah. "Is this Uncle Edward when he was young?" Sarah took the yellowed photograph in her hands and felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The image showed a young man, perhaps in his early 20s, wearing a simple suit and smiling shyly at the camera. But it wasn't the face that caught her attention. It was the watch on the man's wrist, the same golden watch that Edward wore every day. "Ethan, where did you find this?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice calm. "It was inside the book, Mom. Did Uncle Edward forget it?" Sarah turned the photograph over. On the back, delicate handwriting read, "Anthony Johnson, 1985, our first victory in business." Johnson, the same last name as hers. Sarah's heart raced. Anthony Johnson was her father's name, the only information her Aunt Linda had given her about him before she passed away. "Your father was a good man, Sarah, but life took him away before you were born. I only know that he liked business and had a watch that shone in the sun." "Mom, are you okay?" Ethan touched her arm, concerned. "You turned pale." Sarah forced herself to smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just remembered something. Let's keep the photo to return to Uncle Edward next time, okay?" But Sarah couldn't forget the photograph. Throughout the weekend, she studied it meticulously. The man in the photo had features that vaguely resembled her own, the shape of the nose, the way he smiled slightly crookedly. Could it be possible that Edward knew her father? Or was it just a coincidence? On Monday, Sarah arrived at the hospital earlier than usual. She needed to access the old files from the blood bank. If Edward was a regular donor, he should have a complete record with personal information. "Sarah, what are you doing here so early?" asked Joanna, the staff member responsible for the files, finding her rummaging through the folders. "I need to check something about a donor." It's kind of complicated to explain. Joanna, who had known Sarah for years and trusted her integrity, helped her locate Edward's file. Sarah Johnson felt a chill run down her spine as she read the document. It revealed basic information: age, 46 years, address, a simple apartment in downtown Chicago, profession, businessman, marital status, single. But it was the medical record that truly unsettled her. Edward had undergone surgery on his right wrist at the age of 8, exactly the same surgery she had at that age. A rare congenital condition affecting less than 1 in 100,000 people. "Anna, do you know this donor personally?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. "Edward? Yes, I know him. A well-mannered man, always punctual for donations. But he's a bit reserved, you know. Once I asked if he had family, and he looked a bit sad. He said he had lost someone very important a few years ago." Sarah stored this information away as she continued her normal work routine. But throughout the day, her mind buzzed with possibilities. Was Edward really just a kind stranger? Or was there something deeper connecting them? The answer began to form on Wednesday when Edward showed up for his regular donation. Sarah observed him more closely this time, noticing details she had missed before. The way he walked with measured and careful steps. The way he held the books almost reverently. And most importantly, how his eyes lit up whenever Ethan appeared. "Mr. Smith," Sarah approached after the donation was completed. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Edward nodded, looking slightly tense. "Ethan found this in the book you brought," Sarah said, extending the photograph. "I think you forgot it." Edward took the photo, and his expression changed completely. For a moment, Sarah saw a raw vulnerability in his eyes, as if a mask had fallen away. Where did you get this photo?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "What do you mean, where did I get it?" "It was in the book you brought for Ethan." Edward stared at the photo for a long moment, then looked at Sarah, then back at the photo again. "You said your last name is Johnson?" "Yes, why?" "And your grandmother? Was her name Linda?" Sarah felt the world spin. "How do you know my grandmother's name?" Edward sat heavily in one of the waiting room chairs, still holding the photograph. "Because Anthony Johnson was my father too." The words echoed in the air between them like thunder. Sarah felt her legs weaken and leaned against the wall. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I hoped I would never have to tell you this," Edward said, his voice heavy with emotion. "When I learned there was a nurse named Sarah Johnson working here, and then I saw you had a son with a rare blood condition, I started to suspect. The scar on your wrist confirmed my suspicions." Sarah sat beside him, feeling dizzy. "You're my brother." "Half-brother," Edward corrected gently. "Our father had two families. I'm 10 years older than you. When he died, I was 16. Your mother was pregnant, but my mother, she didn't want to keep in touch. She said it would be better for everyone if we went our separate ways." Sarah felt warm tears streaming down her face. "All these years, you knew I existed? I searched for you for a long time. But your grandmother had moved, changed your last name for a while. I only managed to find her a few years ago when you were already working here. And then," Edward hesitated, "I didn't know how to approach you. What would I say? 'Hi, I'm your brother you never knew existed. So you started coming as a donor.' When I learned that Ethan needed transfusions, it felt like fate. I could help without complicating things. At least until I found out if you would want to meet me." Sarah looked at Edward with new eyes. The familiar features she had sensed, the feeling of inexplicable familiarity, the way he cared for Ethan with almost paternal affection. It all made sense now. "That's why you always ask about our father," she said. "That's why you knew about my grandmother," Edward nodded. "Our father was a good man, Sarah. He didn't plan to have two families, but when it happened, he tried to do the best he could. This watch," he touched his wrist, "he gave it to me shortly before he died. He said it was to remind me that family is the most important thing in the world." Sarah looked at the golden watch shining under the fluorescent light and felt a deep connection to something she had never known. Her father, even in absence, had left clues that would eventually lead his children to one another. "Ethan," she whispered suddenly. Ethan will be happy," Edward said, smiling for the first time genuinely. "He always asks if I have kids. Now I can say I have an extraordinary nephew." In that moment, Sarah understood that her life had changed forever. The kind benefactor was not a stranger, he was family. And somehow, mysteriously, Ethan had been the link that brought back a part of her history she never knew was lost. The golden watch continued to shine on Edward's wrist, but now Sarah knew it belonged to her as well. It was a legacy of love that had crossed years and circumstances to reunite a family that fate had separated. May brought with it the first heavy rains of autumn in Illinois. It was a Thursday night when Sarah was finishing her shift at the hospital, organizing the last charts and checking the medications for the night shift. The sky had darkened ominously throughout the afternoon, and now thick raindrops began to drum against the hospital windows. "Sarah, you won't be able to catch a bus today," said Emma, a fellow nurse who was leaving. "The news said a strong storm is coming. You'd better call someone to pick you up or wait it out." Sarah looked out the window and saw the first lightning cutting through the dark sky. Ethan was Linda's house was safe and sound, so she wasn't in a hurry. But the thought of being alone in the hospital during a storm was not very pleasant. That's when she saw Edward walking down the hallway, carrying a small brown paper bag. It was unusual to see him there at that hour. His visits usually happened during the day. "Edward!" Sarah approached. "What are you doing here so late?" He smiled shyly. "I brought some things for Ethan. I didn't know you were still here." Edward looked out the window and frowned. "This rain doesn't look like it's going to let up any time soon." As if the sky wanted to confirm his words, a deafening thunderclap echoed over the hospital, followed by a torrential downpour that began to batter the windows with fury. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. "I haven't seen a storm like this in years." They watched the rain in silence for a few minutes, when suddenly all the lights in the hospital flickered and went out. Darkness enveloped the hallways, interrupted only by the flashes of lightning outside. "Attention, attention!" The voice of the night watchman echoed through the corridors. "We have a total power outage. The emergency generator is only functioning in the ICUs and operating room. We ask everyone to remain calm," Sarah sighed. "Looks like I'm stuck here. I hope Ethan doesn't worry." "You can call him from my cell," Edward offered. "I have a full battery." While Sarah spoke with Ethan and Linda, explaining that she was fine but would be at the hospital until the storm passed, Edward disappeared for a few minutes. When he returned, he was holding 2 scented candles and a thermos. "I always keep these things in the car," he explained, lighting the candles with a lighter. "Hot coffee and a little light. It'll help pass the time." The scent of the candles, a mix of cinnamon and vanilla, blended with the strong aroma of coffee, creating a surprisingly cozy atmosphere in the empty waiting room. Sarah and Edward sat in nearby armchairs, the candles illuminating their faces with a warm, dancing glow. "It's strange to be here like this," Sarah commented, wrapping her hands around the mug of hot coffee. 15 years working in this hospital, and I've never spent a night like this." "Sometimes circumstances force us to stop and really talk," Edward said, gazing at the candle flame. "No rush, no interruptions." The sound of the rain against the windows was almost hypnotic. Between flashes of lightning, Sarah observed Edward more closely. In the candlelight, he looked younger, but also more vulnerable. There was a deep sadness in his eyes that she had never noticed before. "Edward," she said softly, "you mentioned that you lost someone important. Do you want to talk about it?" Edward fell silent for a long moment, holding the mug between his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with emotion. "I had a son," he began, looking out the window. "Liam. He would be Ethan's age today." Sarah felt her heart tighten. "What happened?" "Leukemia," Edward whispered. "He was 5 when he was diagnosed. He fought for 2 years, went through every possible treatment. I spent everything I had, sold everything I owned, but it wasn't enough." His hands trembled slightly. "He died in my arms on a rainy night like this 3 years ago." Sarah felt tears burning her eyes. "Edward, I didn't know. I'm so sorry." "His mother couldn't handle the pain," Edward continued, his voice growing quieter. "She blamed me for not being able to save him, for not discovering the illness sooner. Our marriage ended 6 months after Liam died. A particularly strong lightning bolt illuminated the room, followed by a thunderclap that made the windows rattle. Sarah instinctively moved closer to Edward. "That's why you started helping Ethan," she said, finally understanding. "Seeing my son sick must have brought all those memories back." Edward nodded, discreetly wiping away a tear. "At first I thought it would be too painful. But Ethan, he has a light in his eyes that Liam had too. A curiosity about the world, a genuine joy even in the face of difficulties. Helping Ethan makes me feel like I'm honoring my son's memory." Sarah reached out and touched Edward's arm. "Liam would be proud of the father you are. You saved my son's life, Edward. That means everything to me." "When I saw Ethan for the first time," Edward continued, "so small, so brave during the medical procedures, it was like seeing Liam again. And you, the way you care for him, how dedicated you are. You are the mother I wished I could have been for Liam. You were a wonderful father, Sarah said firmly. No father can control illness or fate. What you can control is the love you give, and from what I see, you loved Liam completely. Edward smiled through his tears. Ethan has given me back some hope. Watching him get better, seeing him grow strong and healthy. It's like Liam is telling me it's okay, that I can stop blaming myself. The storm continued outside, but inside the small candlelit room, Sarah and Edward found a refuge of mutual understanding. They talked about pain and loss, about hopes and fears, about the meaning of family and unconditional love. "Edward," Sarah said after a while, "you don't have to carry this pain alone. You have a family again. Ethan already loves you like an uncle, and I'm happy to have a brother. Sometimes I get scared," Edward confessed. "Afraid of getting too attached and then losing you both too." "Life doesn't come with guarantees," Sarah replied. "But you can't let the fear of losing stop you from loving. Ethan needs male figures in his life, and you've already proven to be a caring and honorable man." Edward took Sarah's hand, and he squeezed gently. "Thank you for letting me be a part of your lives. I promise I will be here, no matter what happens. And we will be here for you too," said Sarah. "Family is that, being present in life's storms." As if the universe was listening, the rain began to gradually lessen. Some emergency lights flickered and came back on, indicating that power would be restored soon. "Looks like the worst is over," commented Edward, blowing out the candles. "Yes," agreed Sarah, "but I'm glad this happened. Some conversations can only happen in the dark, right?" Edward smiled, a genuine smile devoid of the sadness he always carried. "Ethan is going to be excited about the books I brought. This time they are about astronomy. I thought he might be interested in the stars." "He will love it," said Sarah. "And Edward, how about dinner at home on Sunday? Linda always makes more food than we can eat, and Ethan keeps asking to invite Uncle Edward." Edward felt his heart warm. "I would love that." When they finally managed to leave the hospital, the storm had completely passed. The air was clean and fresh, and some stars were already appearing among the dispersing clouds. Edward offered Sarah a ride, and during the drive they both felt that something fundamental had changed between them. They were no longer just brother and sister-in-law brought together by chance. They were chosen family, people who had decided to share pains and joys, storms and sunny days. The stormy night had washed away not only the streets of the suburb of Chicago, but also the last remnants of distrust between them. 3 weeks after the stormy night, Sarah began to notice an extraordinary change in Ethan. The boy, who had always been curious and intelligent, was showing an increasing interest in music. It all started when Edward brought a small children's guitar as a gift. "It's for you to practice the musical adventures of pirates," said Edward, handing the instrument to Ethan with a warm smile. "Every good adventurer needs to know how to tell their stories in song." Ethan held the guitar as if it were a treasure. His small hands strummed the strings experimentally, producing off-key sounds but full of enthusiasm. "Mum, look, I can make music," exclaimed Ethan, his eyes shining with joy. Sarah laughed, thinking it would just be another toy that would occupy Ethan for a few days. But she was completely wrong. Within a few days, Ethan had discovered how to play simple chords on the guitar. Without any formal lessons, just playing and experimenting, he was able to create melodies that, while simple, had a touching quality. It was as if music was a language he had always known how to speak, but was just waiting for the right instrument to express himself. "Dr. Richard, you need to see this," said Sarah one morning when Ethan accompanied her to the hospital for a routine checkup. Ethan was sitting in the pediatric ward waiting room, gently strumming his guitar. Other patients, children and adults, had stopped to listen. A sweet and melancholic melody flowed from the boy's small fingers, filling the room with an unexpected peace. Dr. Richard approached, adjusting his glasses with curiosity. "Ethan, where did you learn to play like that?" "I didn't learn, doctor," Ethan replied innocently. "The music was already here inside," he pointed to his chest. The guitar just lets it out. Sarah felt a shiver. There was something almost supernatural about the way Ethan connected with music. It was as if he had been born with an intuitive understanding of melody and rhythm. "Can I play a song for the other kids who are waiting?" asked Ethan, looking around the room full of eager children. "Of course, my love," said Sarah, proud and at the same time impressed. Ethan positioned himself in the center of the room and began to play an original melody, something he had created during the week. These were not just random chords. There was a real harmonic progression, a musical structure that made sense. And then he began to sing. His voice, sweet and clear, told the story of a brave little fish who helped other sick fish at the bottom of the sea. The lyrics were simple, suitable for children, but there was an emotional depth that touched everyone present. The little goldfish swam through the sea, looking for friends to help. When he saw someone sad and alone, he sang a song full of love. Sarah looked around and saw tears in the eyes of several mothers. The children were mesmerized, some humming along, others gently swaying to the rhythm of the music. Even the hospital staff had stopped their activities to listen. When Ethan finished, the room erupted in applause. He smiled shyly, hugging the guitar to his chest. "Ethan," said Dr. Richard, visibly moved, "you have a very special gift." It was at that moment that Sarah noticed Edward standing at the entrance of the room. He had come for his regular donation and witnessed the entire performance. But there was something strange in his expression, not just admiration, but a deep recognition, as if he was seeing something familiar. After Ethan was called for his examination, Edward approached Sarah. "He's singing the lullabies," Edward said, his voice full of emotion. "What do you mean?" asked Sarah, confused. "The songs he sang are melodies our father used to hum. Our paternal grandmother sang them to him when he was a child. I recognize the harmony, the style. It's impossible that it's a coincidence." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "But Ethan has never heard those songs. How could he?" "I don't know," Edward admitted, "but music can be hereditary. Maybe some talents pass through generations in ways we don't fully understand." In the following weeks, Ethan transformed the hospital corridors into his personal stage. Whenever he accompanied Sarah to work or came for checkups, he brought the guitar, and invariably he ended up playing for other patients. There was something magical happening. Children who arrived crying and scared calmed down when they heard Ethan play. Lonely elderly people smiled and began to share stories of their own musical youth. Even the most stressed employees at the hospital seemed to find a moment of peace when Ethan's music echoed through the halls. "Sarah," said Mrs. Thompson, the cleaning assistant, one afternoon, "that boy of yours has a guardian angel. His music heals more than medicine." Sarah began to realize that Mrs. Thompson was right. Ethan wasn't just playing music. He was creating moments of emotional healing. His songs spoke of courage, hope, friendship, and overcoming challenges, always through simple metaphors that even the youngest children could understand. One afternoon, while Ethan played in the waiting room, a 5-year-old girl, a cancer patient who looked visibly fragile and scared, approached him. "Can you play a song to make my pain go away?" she asked, with an innocence that broke the hearts of everyone present. Ethan stopped playing and looked seriously at the girl. "What's your name?" "Sophia." "Sophia, I'm going to make a song just for you. But you have to close your eyes and imagine you're a very brave princess, okay?" Sophia nodded and closed her eyes. Ethan began to play a soft and comforting melody, singing about Princess Sophia, who was stronger than any illness, brighter than any sadness. Sarah watched, tears in her eyes, as Sophia's face gradually relaxed. When Ethan finished, the girl was smiling. "The pain has lessened," said Sophia, surprised. "How did you do that?" Ethan shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Music is like a remedy for the heart. My mom always says that when we love something, it becomes stronger." That night, at home, Sarah lay down with Ethan, listening to him play softly before sleeping. The melodies flowing from the little guitar were different every day, always original, always touching. "Ethan," Sarah said softly, "how do you create such beautiful music?" Ethan thought for a moment, strumming the strings thoughtfully. "I listen to people, Mom. Everyone has a song inside their heart. Sometimes they're happy, sometimes sad, sometimes scared. I just play the music they need to hear. Sarah kissed her son's forehead, impressed by his early wisdom. Ethan hadn't just inherited an extraordinary musical talent. He had an emotional intuition that allowed him to connect deeply with those around him. Uncle Edward said our grandfather also liked music, Ethan commented. Do you think he could play too? I think so, my love. And I'm sure he would be very proud of you. Ethan smiled and played one last melody before sleeping, a gentle lullaby that seemed to envelop the room in an atmosphere of peace and protection. Sarah kept listening even after Ethan fell asleep, feeling that something extraordinary was happening in their lives. The boy who had almost been lost due to a rare illness was becoming a source of healing for others. And somehow, mysteriously, through music, he was connecting generations of their family who had never met, creating a sound bridge between the past and the present. Ethan's music was not just entertainment, it was a call from the heart, a reminder that even in the most difficult circumstances, beauty and hope always find a way to manifest. It was a cloudy Saturday in June when Sarah made the discovery that would completely change her perception of Edward. Ethan was participating in a small talent show organized by the nurses at the hospital to cheer up the hospitalized children, and Edward had arrived early to watch the performance. Uncle Edward! Ethan ran to hug him as soon as he saw him arrive. You got here just in time. I'm going to play that new song I made about dolphins. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Edward said, returning the hug affectionately. I even brought my camera to record it. The makeshift auditorium on the ground floor of the hospital was full. Parents, staff, patients who could leave their rooms. Everyone was eager to see the children's performances. Ethan would be the last to perform, an honor that Dr. Richard had insisted on giving him. While waiting, Edward took off his coat, a simple navy blazer, and hung it on the chair next to Sarah. The heat in the crowded auditorium was becoming unbearable, even with the fans on. When Ethan stepped onto the small makeshift stage, holding his guitar confidently, Sarah felt her chest swell with pride. The boy, who just a few months ago had been pale and fragile, now radiated energy and joy. This song is for all my friends here at the hospital, Ethan said into the microphone, his childlike voice echoing through the auditorium. It's about dolphins that take care of each other. In the deep sea, the melody Ethan played was more complex than his previous compositions. There was a musical sophistication that impressed even the adults present. His clear and pitch-perfect voice told the story of dolphins forming a chosen family, caring for the more fragile members of the group. In the deep blue of the ocean lives a special family, dolphins that share their bread and spread love like no other. Sarah looked at Edward and saw tears in his eyes. Throughout the performance, he didn't take his eyes off Ethan, as if he were witnessing something miraculous happen. When Ethan finished, the auditorium erupted in applause. Children clapped enthusiastically, adults stood up to cheer, and some people were visibly moved. That boy's going places, commented a lady sitting behind Sarah. I've never seen a child with such natural talent. After the performance, while Ethan received congratulations from all sides, Sarah noticed that Edward had forgotten his coat on the chair. She picked it up to return it, but when she lifted the blazer, some papers slipped out of the inner pocket. Instinctively, Sarah bent down to pick them up. They were folded documents, and when she went to organize them to put them back in the pocket, she couldn't help but... Marina's heart stopped as she saw the header of one of the documents. Edward Smith Foundation, Philanthropic Hospitals. With trembling hands, she unfolded the paper. It was a financial report showing a network of 5 philanthropic hospitals spread across rural Illinois and Indiana. The numbers were impressive. Millions of dollars in investments, thousands of patients treated for free each year. Another document was a property deed for a private clinic in a suburb of Chicago. And the third paper took her breath away. It was a copy of the will of Anthony Johnson, her father, dated just a few months before his death. Sarah, are you okay? Ethan appeared beside her, noticing her shocked expression. Sarah looked up at him, holding the documents with trembling hands. Ethan, what is this? Ethan saw the papers in her hands and his face paled. This wasn't meant for you to see yet. You own a network of hospitals. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. All this time, you presented yourself as an ordinary businessman, and in reality, you are rich, Ethan completed, looking down. Yes, Sarah, I have considerable financial resources. Sarah felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. Why did you lie to me? Why did you dress like an ordinary person, drive simple cars, act like just any donor? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, visibly embarrassed. Because I wanted you to know me for who I am, not for what I have. Do you think if I had come here on the first day saying, "Hi, I'm your millionaire brother," our relationship would be the same? I don't know, Sarah exclaimed, her voice rising. But at least it would have been honest. Some people began to look in their direction. Ethan gently touched Sarah's arm. Can we talk about this privately, please? Sarah looked around and saw Anna approaching, still beaming from the success of her presentation. She forced a smile and tucked the documents into her pocket. Sure, but this conversation is going to happen, Ethan. On the way home, Anna chatted excitedly about her presentation, oblivious to the tension between Sarah and Ethan. When they arrived at the apartment, Sarah asked Anna to show her new songs to Linda in the kitchen, while she and Ethan sat in the small living room. Explain it to me, Sarah said, crossing her arms. Everything. From the beginning, Ethan sighed deeply. When Liam died, I inherited a significant sum from my ex-wife's family. She came from a wealthy family, and when we separated, she renounced everything, said she didn't want anything that reminded her of our life together. And you decided to create hospitals? Yes, because I saw what it was like to be on the other side, needing help and not being able to afford it. Even having resources at the time wasn't enough to save Liam. Imagine those who have nothing. Sarah felt her anger beginning to turn into understanding, but she was still hurt by the omission. The Edward Smith Foundation primarily serves children with rare diseases, Ethan continued. When I learned about Anna, when I saw that you were going through the same anguish I went through, I couldn't just stand by. But why didn't you tell me? Why all this charade? Ethan looked directly into her eyes. Because you are a proud woman, Sarah, independent, a fighter. If I'd come offering financial help, would you have accepted it? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but stopped. Ethan was right. She would never accept charity, even from a brother. And then, Ethan continued, when I started to truly get to know you, to see how special Anna is, how amazing you are as a mother, I didn't want that to change. I didn't want you to see me as the rich brother, but as family. Sarah remained silent for a long moment, processing everything. What does our father's will say? Ethan hesitated. He left a letter for you, and an inheritance. What kind of inheritance? A farm in rural Indiana, and a family recipe, Sarah frowned. Recipe? Homemade sweets, the Oliveira family's specialty for generations. It was with this recipe that our father started his first business. And it was what gave me the financial foundation to invest in the hospitals. Sarah felt her head spin. You're telling me our family has a tradition of making sweets? Gourmet chocolate truffles, special coconut candies, sweet coconut treats with secret recipes. Our great-grandmother was famous in the region for her sweets. Our father modernized the business, created a small company. When he died, I inherited the recipes and expanded. Anna appeared in the room at that moment, carrying her guitar. Mom, can I play a new song for you? Sarah looked at her son and then at Ethan. There were so many revelations, so much information to process, but one thing was clear. Ethan hadn't lied about his feelings for Anna or about wanting to be part of their lives. Of course, my love, Sarah said to Anna, play for us. As Anna played a sweet melody about families reuniting after being lost for a long time, Sarah looked at Ethan and saw not a strange millionaire, but a man who had used his pain and resources to help others. The anger was giving way to a complex understanding. Ethan had kept secrets, yes, but for understandable reasons. And now, with all the cards on the table, they could build a truly honest relationship. "Ethan," Sarah said when Anna finished playing, "tomorrow I want to see those hospitals, and I want to read our father's letter. But most importantly, I want you to stop hiding. We are family, and family doesn't need masks." Ethan smiled, and for the first time since they met, Sarah saw genuine relief in his eyes. The secrets were finally coming to light, and perhaps that was exactly what they needed to build something real together. Sunday dawned sunny, but Sarah had barely slept. The revelations about Ethan and the existence of an inheritance, Gabriel's father, occupied his thoughts throughout the night. When Ethan woke up, Sarah was already in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with more care than usual. "Mom, are you nervous?" Ethan asked, watching Sarah stir the coffee with quick, anxious movements. "Your hands are shaking." Sarah stopped and looked at her own hands. Ethan was right. "I'm a little anxious, my love. Today, we're going to meet your dad's family that you've never known. Is Uncle Edward going to tell stories about Grandpa that we never met?" Ethan's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "That's right. And maybe we'll discover interesting things about our family." Edward arrived at 9 in the morning, driving a different car, a black SUV, more luxurious than the simple cars he usually drove. But his expression was the same as always, warm when he saw Ethan, but slightly apprehensive when meeting Sarah's gaze. "Good morning, family," he said, hugging Ethan and respectfully kissing Sarah's cheek. "Ready for a trip to the past?" The first stop was at the courthouse in downtown Chicago, where Edward had kept the original documents left by Anthony Johnson. The building was old, smelling of old paper and furniture wax. The clerk, a white-haired gentleman named Mr. Johnson, had known Edward for years. "Mrs. Sarah," Mr. Johnson said, adjusting his thick glasses, "it's an honor to meet the daughter of Mr. Anthony. He was a very respected man here in the area." Sarah held the sealed envelope containing her father's letter with trembling hands. "Can I read it here?"
"Of course."
"There's a private room over there," Mr. Johnson indicated. In the small room, with Ethan sitting between her and Edward, Sarah carefully opened the yellowed envelope. The handwriting was elegant, written by hand on letterhead. "My dear daughter Sarah," she began to read aloud, her voice choked. "If you are reading this letter, it means that fate has allowed you to meet, you and your brother Edward. I ask for forgiveness for not being present in your life, but know that I thought of you every day since I learned that your mother was expecting you." Ethan listened attentively, even without fully understanding the meaning of the words. "I leave you Santa Teresa Farm in Springfield, Indiana. It is not just a property, it is the heart of our family. There, your great-grandmother Dolores created the candy recipes that sustained generations of the Johnsons. There I learned that family is not just blood, but also tradition, care, and love passed down from generation to generation." Sarah paused, reading, her eyes misty. Edward gently touched her shoulder. "Continue, Mom," Ethan whispered. "I want to know about the farm. The recipe for the candies is in..." "The farm's safe," Sarah continued, "along with a diary that my grandmother wrote about every culinary secret. But the real treasure, my daughter, is in the library of the main house. Your great-grandmother was an herbalist and knew the secrets of medicinal plants that were passed down through generations. I believe that you, with your generous heart and healing hands, will know how to use this wisdom to help others." Edward shifted in his chair. "Sarah, I never mentioned the library of the farm because..." "Because what?" she asked, interrupting the reading. "Because I don't know if you will believe it. The medicinal plants that our great-grandmother cultivated. Some of them are used today in experimental treatments for rare blood diseases." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "What do you mean?" "Keep reading the letter," Edward suggested. "Maybe our dad will explain better. I'm sure Edward has already told you about our candy business. The letter continued, but what he may not know is that the true success of the family came when we combined traditional recipes with knowledge of medicinal plants. Many of our candies had therapeutic properties. It was a way to bring healing disguised as dessert. Ethan's eyes widened. The candies were medicine, Mom. Sarah continued reading. My daughter, you chose to be a nurse, dedicating your life to caring for others. This is not a coincidence. Caring is in the blood of the Johnsons. The farm is yours by right, just like all the knowledge it holds. Use it to continue our tradition of healing, but in a way that makes sense for you and for modern times. The letter ended with a touching farewell and the exact location of the safe on the farm. Sarah carefully folded the paper, feeling connected to a father she never knew, but who obviously loved her and believed in her potential. Edward, she finally said, how long have you known about all this? I discovered the farm 2 years ago, Edward admitted. But I was waiting for the right moment to share it with you. And after I met Ethan, seeing how you care for people, I knew Dad was right. You are the right person to continue this tradition. Can we visit the farm today? Ethan asked excitedly. Edward smiled. That's exactly what I planned. The trip to Springfield took 3 hours. During the journey, Edward shared stories he had discovered about the Johnson family. How great-grandmother Dolores had arrived in the region in the early 20th century, fleeing the drought in the southeast. How she had learned about medicinal plants from local herbalists and created her own recipes. How each generation had adapted and expanded the family knowledge. Grandpa Anthony was the most innovative, Edward explained. He was the first to think about selling the candies outside the region. He created special packaging, registered the recipes, turning family tradition into a serious business. When they arrived at Santa Teresa Farm, Sarah felt as if she were returning home, even though she had never been there. The property was larger than she had imagined. A 2-story main house with colonial architecture, surrounded by extensive gardens where century-old medicinal plants still grew. My God, Sarah whispered, stepping out of the car. It's beautiful. The house smelled of old wood and dried herbs. In the kitchen there was still adaptações, brigadeiro da alegria, joy truffle, cocadas da energia, energy coconut bites, beijinhos da paz, peace coconut treats, erva cidreira, lemon balm, rapadura de cana, organic cane sugar, casero, caretaker. The original wood-burning stoves stood alongside the modern equipment that Edward had installed to preserve the property. But it was in the library that Sarah truly felt the presence of her ancestors. The walls were lined with shelves reaching to the ceiling, filled with books on botany, traditional medicine, culinary recipes, and handwritten diaries. In the center of the room, a solid wood desk held notebooks with the delicate handwriting of Dolores Johnson. Mom, look at all these books about plants. Ethan ran between the shelves, fascinated. Sarah picked up one of the diaries and opened it at random. The page spoke of a specific herb used to strengthen the blood of weak children. Another page described a recipe for a joy truffle made with a plant that brought joy to sad hearts. Edward, Sarah said, her voice filled with emotion, our great-grandmother was practicing integrative medicine long before that term even existed. And now you can continue her work. Edward replied, with your modern nursing training and the family's traditional knowledge, you could create something truly special. Ethan had found an illustrated plant book and was carefully flipping through it. Mom, some of these plants still grow here in the garden. Can I plant some in our apartment? Sarah looked out the library window and saw the expansive gardens, where dozens of medicinal species still bloomed, tended by a caretaker Edward had hired to maintain the property. Ethan, she said, an idea beginning to form in her mind. What if instead of taking the plants to our apartment, we moved here? The boy's eyes widened. Live on the farm, for real? Sarah looked at Edward. Would it be possible? I could work at the hospital during the day and develop some projects here in the afternoons and on weekends. Edward smiled, and Sarah saw tears of joy in his eyes. Sarah, this farm is yours. You can do whatever you want with it. And if you need resources for any project, no, Sarah interrupted, but without anger. If I do anything here, it will be with my own work. But I accept your partnership, Edward. I accept having a brother who supports me and helps me when I need it. In that moment, standing in her great-grandmother's library, surrounded by the knowledge of generations, Sarah felt she had finally found her true purpose. It wasn't just to be a nurse. It was to be a bridge between traditional and modern medicine, honoring her roots while helping people in the present. Ethan began to hum a soft melody, inspired by the magic of the place, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that her life had changed forever. 3 weeks after discovering the farm, Sarah was still processing all the changes in her life when she received an unexpected invitation. The city council of a suburb of Chicago was organizing a Brazilian cultural fair in the town square, and Dr. Richard had suggested that the hospital participate with a booth on preventive medicine. "Sarah," Dr. Richard said one Tuesday morning, "how about you represent the hospital at the fair? Ethan could do some musical performances, and you could talk about health care. It would be a great opportunity to bring the hospital closer to the community." The idea excited Sarah. Since the visit to the farm, she had been full of plans on how to integrate traditional knowledge and modern medicine. The fair would be a perfect opportunity to test some of those ideas in practice. "Edward," she said on the phone that night, "do you know the original recipes for the family's sweets?" "I know some," Edward replied. "Why?" "I want to make some sweets for the cultural fair. Nothing commercial, just for people to taste and learn about our tradition. Could you teach me?" Edward was silent for a moment. "Sarah, are you sure? The recipes are complex, and some have ingredients that aren't easy to find. I'm sure. I want to honor our great-grandmother and show Ethan where he comes from." The following Saturday, Edward arrived at Sarah's apartment carrying 2 bags full of ingredients. There were things Sarah had never seen: special brown sugar, artisanal condensed milk, rare nuts, and small jars of plant extracts. "These are the original ingredients," Edward explained, organizing everything on the kitchen table. "Some I brought from the farm, others I got from special suppliers who still follow traditional methods." Ethan watched everything with fascination, sitting on a tall stool next to the stove. "Uncle Edward, will the sweets taste different from the ones we buy at the bakery?" "Completely different," Edward replied, smiling. "These sweets have soul. Ethan, each ingredient was chosen not only for its flavor, but for what it can do for people's bodies and hearts." Sarah put on the apron that had belonged to her grandmother, Linda, and positioned herself next to Edward. "Where do we start?" "We'll make 3 types," Edward said, consulting a handwritten notebook. "Joy truffles, energy coconut bites, and peace coconut treats. These are the most traditional recipes of the family." The first sweet, the joy truffle, included special cocoa, condensed milk made from goats raised on the farm, and a touch of lemon balm extract. "The lemon balm balances the sugar and brings a sense of well-being," Edward explained as Sarah stirred the mixture over low heat. "How did our great-grandmother know these things?" Sarah asked, fascinated by the precision of the instructions. "She learned from midwives and herbalists in the region," Edward replied. "Back then, women were responsible not only for cooking, but for taking care of the family's health. Each recipe was also a remedy. Ethan asked to help roll the truffles. His small hands worked carefully, creating perfect little balls that Edward coated with artisanal chocolate sprinkles. The energy coconut bites included fresh coconut, organic cane sugar, and a pinch of ground ginger. "This sweet was made especially for people who worked hard," Edward explained. "The ginger gives energy, and the coconut provides lasting stamina." Sarah tasted one of the coconut bites and felt an explosion of flavors in her mouth. It was sweet, but with a complexity that industrial sweets could never match. There was layers of flavor that revealed themselves gradually. The peace bites were the most special. They contained sweetened, condensed milk mixed with a gentle chamomile infusion, and were topped with freshly grated coconut. "These were given to restless children and stressed adults," said Edward. A chamomile naturally calms. It's like music, but in candy form, commented Ethan, tasting a peace bite. It makes you want to be calm and happy at the same time. Sarah laughed at Ethan's comparison, but perfectly understood what he meant. There was something almost magical about how those sweets affected not only the palate, but also the mood. As the treats cooled, Edward shared more stories about the family tradition. Our great-grandmother Dolores used to give out sweets for free to needy families during religious holidays. She said that feeding people's bodies and spirits was a form of prayer. That's what I want to do at the fair, said Sarah, her eyes shining. Not sell, but share. Show people that food can be medicine, that tradition can be healing. On the day of the cultural fair, the central square of the suburb of Chicago was unrecognizable. Dozens of colorful stalls offered typical foods from all regions of the United States. The air was fragrant with the aroma of gumbo, fried dough, chicken croquettes, corn pudding, and hundreds of other delights. The hospital booth was located between a tapioca stall and another selling gourmet chocolate truffles. Sarah had decorated the space with old photos of the farm and posters explaining the history of the medicinal sweets from the Johnson family. "Come try the sweets that heal the heart," shouted Ethan excitedly, drawing people to the booth. He wore a yellow shirt with the hospital logo and held his guitar, ready to play whenever a small crowd formed. The first person to show interest was Mrs. Rose, a 70-year-old lady who suffered from chronic insomnia. "My dear," she said to Sarah, "do these sweets really do something, or is it just talk?" Sarah smiled and offered a peace bite to Mrs. Rose. "Try it and tell me what you feel." Mrs. Rose chewed slowly, thoughtful. "Wow, what a different taste. It's sweet but not overwhelming, and it has a flavor of tranquility. The recipe uses natural chamomile," Sarah explained. "My great-grandmother made these sweets for people who had trouble relaxing. Can I take some home?" asked Mrs. Rose, visibly impressed. Soon, a small line of curious people formed. Each person who tried the sweets was surprised by the unique flavors and the sensations they provoked. Ethan played between tastings, singing songs about family traditions and recipes passed down from grandmother to granddaughter. His sweet voice attracted even more people to the booth. That's when an elegant man in his 50s approached the booth. He wore an expensive suit and observed everything with professional interest. "Are you the ones responsible for these sweets?" he asked. "Yes," Sarah replied. "It's a family tradition. Recipes over 100 years old." The man tasted each of the 3 types of sweets, making mental notes. "I'm a consultant for food companies," he finally said. "These sweets have extraordinary commercial potential. Would you like to discuss business partnerships?" Sarah looked at Edward, who had just arrived and was watching the conversation. "Thank you for your interest," Sarah said politely, "but our goal is not commercial. We want to preserve tradition and help people." The consultant insisted, talking about profits and national expansion, but Sarah remained firm. Those sweets represented something greater than money. They represented love, care, and ancestral wisdom. By the end of the afternoon, as the fair was winding down, Sarah counted the smiles she had seen throughout the day. Dozens of people had tasted the sweets and expressed interest in the family's stories. Some had asked for information about medicinal plants, while others wanted to know more about traditional medicine. "Mom," Ethan said as they packed up the booth, "today I understood something important." "What was it, my love?" "Our family didn't make sweets just to make money. They made them to spread joy in the world." Sarah hugged her son, feeling that he had perfectly grasped the spirit of the family tradition. Edward joined the hug, and the 3 stood there, surrounded by the sweet aroma that still lingered in the air. In that moment, Sarah knew she had found a perfect way to honor her roots while building a meaningful future. The sweets of tradition were not just recipes. They were a philosophy of life based on care, love, and the belief that small gestures can transform the world, one person at a time. It was a grey Monday in August when Sarah received a call that would change everything again. Dr. Richard, with his usually calm voice, sounded different. There was a barely concealed urgency in his words. "Sarah, I need you to come to the hospital as soon as possible. We need to talk about something very important related to your routine tests." Sarah's heart raced. "Did something happen, doctor? Are the results bad?" "Not exactly. In fact, it's something extraordinary, but I need to explain in person. Can you come now?" Sarah left Ethan with Linda and rushed to the hospital. Throughout the bus ride, her mind swirled with terrible possibilities. For months, she had been feeling a strange fatigue, but attributed it to the stress of recent changes in her life. Dr. Richard was waiting for her in his office, accompanied by Dr. Helen Carter, a hematologist whom Sarah recognized but had never worked with directly. "Sarah, please sit down," said Dr. Richard, nervously adjusting his glasses. "What we're going to discuss may be difficult to process." "Doctor, you're scaring me." "What happened?" Dr. Helen leaned forward, holding a folder with test results. "Sarah, did you always know you had a rare blood condition?" "I knew I was a carrier of a genetic alteration, yes. My grandmother told me when I was a teenager. But I never had symptoms." "Exactly. You are a carrier, but you never developed the disease. What we discovered in your most recent tests is revolutionary." Sarah felt her mouth go dry. "Revolutionary how?" Dr. Helen opened the folder and showed a series of graphs and numbers that Sarah couldn't fully comprehend. "Your blood contains unique antibodies. Not only are you immune to the disease that Ethan inherited, but your body produces substances that can neutralize the condition." "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. "In simple terms," explained Dr. Richard, "your blood may be the key to curing the rare disease that Ethan has, and potentially hundreds of other children." Sarah felt as if the world was spinning around her. "Is that possible?" "We're sending your samples to specialized laboratories in Illinois and abroad," said Dr. Helen, "but the preliminary results are impressive. You may have been born with the genetic solution for a disease that affects thousands of children worldwide." "But how is that possible? Why me?" Dr. Richard exchanged a meaningful glance with Dr. Helen. "Sarah, have you ever heard of beneficial genetic mutations? Sometimes, very rarely, the human body develops natural solutions to problems that medicine is still trying to solve." Sarah thought of her great-grandmother Dolores, the medicinal plants, the family tradition of healing. "Doctor, could this have something to do with family genetics? With the medicinal plants that my family has used for generations?" Dr. Helen raised an eyebrow. "It's an interesting theory. Continuous exposure to certain natural substances over generations could theoretically influence genetic development. But it would be something very rare." "What does this mean for Ethan?" Sarah asked, focusing on what really mattered. "It means we can develop a personalized treatment for him based on your antibodies," replied Dr. Richard, "and eventually a treatment that could help other children as well." Sarah left the hospital in shock. Throughout her life, she had felt inadequate, as if she were not good enough as a mother, as a professional, as a person. And now she discovered that she carried the possibility of saving lives in her blood. She needed to talk to Edward. She found him at the farm, where she had started going regularly to care for the medicinal plants and study her great-grandmother Dolores's journals. Edward was in the garden meticulously watering the herbs. "Edward, I need to tell you something incredible," Sarah said, still breathless from the trip. Edward stopped what he was doing and turned to her, immediately seeing the look of astonishment on her face. "What happened?" Sarah told him everything, the tests, the unique antibodies, the possibility of developing a revolutionary treatment. Edward listened in silence, but Sarah noticed that he didn't seem as surprised as he should have been. "Edward," she said slowly, "you're not surprised." Edward sighed and sat down on a stone bench among the plants. "Sarah, there's something I haven't told you about our family." "What else have you kept from me?" Sarah's voice carried a mix of exhaustion and irritation. "Our father didn't die of natural causes. He died participating in a medical experiment." Sarah felt her legs weaken. "What kind of experiment?" "He was a volunteer in a study on genetic blood diseases. The goal was to develop natural treatments based on medicinal plants, combined with experimental gene therapy." "My God, Edward, the experiment went wrong for him." But the data they collected from his blood was used to refine treatments that saved other people. And I always suspected that you might have inherited something special from him. Sarah sat next to her brother, trying to process this new revelation. Is that why you started helping me? Did you know I could have special antibodies? I suspected. When I learned that Ethan had the same condition as in Dad's studies, and that you were a carrier but never developed symptoms, it seemed too specific to be a coincidence. Sarah was silent for a long moment, observing the medicinal plants growing around them. Edward, do you think our great-grandmother knew that the plants she used were somehow preparing our DNA for this? I don't know, Edward admitted. But I can tell you that I found notes in her journals about the strong blood of the women in the family and specific recipes to protect future generations. Sarah thought of Ethan, his natural music, his emotional healing ability, his quick recovery after he started receiving transfusions. Ethan inherited something special too, didn't he? I believe so. His music, the way he connects with people, that's also a form of healing. That night, Sarah called Dr. Richard. Doctor, I agree to participate in all necessary studies. I want you to develop this treatment as quickly as possible. Sarah, do you understand that this means many tests, many trips to Illinois, possibly years of research? I understand. And Dr. Richard, I want you to include medicinal plants in the studies. I have reasons to believe they may be important to the process. Medicinal plants? Sarah, that's very experimental. Doctor, my family has been using plants as medicine for over 100 years, and now we discover that my blood has unique properties. Don't you think there could be a connection? Dr. Richard was silent for a moment. You know what, Sarah? You're right. Modern medicine is rediscovering many solutions that traditional peoples have known for centuries. I'll talk to the team about incorporating herbal medicine into the studies. When she hung up the phone, Sarah sat on the porch of the farm and looked at the stars. Ethan was sleeping in the room that Edward had prepared for him, probably dreaming of melodies and maritime adventures. She, who had always felt small and inadequate, had discovered that she carried the possibility of healing diseases in her blood. She, who cared for others by instinct, could now care on a scale she had never imagined. The family tradition of healing was not just symbolic, it was literal, encoded in her DNA through generations of wise women who knew the secrets of nature. Sarah Johnson, nurse at the public hospital, single mother, discoverer of a lost family, was about to. It would become the key to a medical revolution. And it all started with the unconditional love for her son and the mysterious appearance of a brother she never knew existed. The blood running through her veins carried not only life, but hope for hundreds of families facing the same anguish she had endured. Sarah finally understood that she had always been enough, more than enough. She was extraordinary. 2 years had passed since the first discoveries about Sarah's unique antibodies. The Chicago General Hospital had become unrecognizable, not only physically, with a new modern pediatric wing, but also in spirit and purpose. It was a radiant September morning when Sarah arrived at the hospital for what would be one of the most important days of her life. The research center that Edward had funded and she had helped design was ready to be officially inaugurated. But before that, she had a crucial conversation with Dr. Richard. Sarah, the doctor said, holding a thick report, the final results of the studies have arrived from Illinois. You need to sit down to hear this. Sarah took a deep breath. 2 years of exams, tests, travels, hopes and anxieties had led to this moment. The treatment based on your antibodies was tested on 50 children with the same condition as Ethan. Dr. Richard began, barely containing his emotion. Success rate, 96%. Sarah felt her legs go weak. 96%. The 2 children who did not respond completely showed significant improvements. Sarah, you not only saved Ethan, you saved dozens of children, and you will save hundreds more. Tears of joy streamed down Sarah's face. Throughout her life, She had doubted her worth, her capability, her importance in the world. And now she discovered that her existence had literally been a blessing for countless families. And there's more, Dr. Richard continued. The combination of your antibodies with extracts from the medicinal plants from your farm enhance the results. The traditional medicine of your family really works when combined with modern technology. Sarah thought of her great-grandmother Dolores, of all the women in the Johnson family who had dedicated their lives to caring for others. They were right. Caring was in the family's blood, literally. Dr. Richard, when can we start making the treatment available to all the children who need it? The protocol has already been approved by the FDA. Starting next month, any child with this condition in the United States will have access to the treatment free of charge through Medicaid. Sarah left the office heading towards the auditorium where the inauguration ceremony would take place. The venue was packed. Families who had benefited from the studies, healthcare professionals, local authorities, and dozens of children who were now running and playing normally thanks to the developed treatments. Ethan, now 9 years old and visibly healthy, was on stage tuning his guitar. He had grown not only physically but also as a musician. His compositions were more sophisticated, his performances attracted people from all over the region, and he had become a kind of symbol of hope for other sick children. "Mom!" Ethan waved when he saw Sarah enter the auditorium. "Can I start now?" "Of course, my love." Ethan began to play a song he had composed especially for that day. The melody was cheerful and hopeful, and the lyrics spoke of families coming together, of healing that comes from love, of children growing strong to help other children. Once upon a time, there was a nurse mother who cared with so much love. She didn't know that in her blood. She held the cure for pain. Sarah watched the audience as Ethan sang. She saw Mrs. Rose, who was now sleeping well thanks to the medicinal teas Sarah had taught her to prepare. She saw Sophia, the girl who had asked for a song to make the pain go away, now running around the auditorium with full energy. She saw dozens of other families whose lives had been transformed. Edward approached Sarah during Ethan's performance. He was wearing a smart suit, but Sarah noticed he still wore his father's gold watch. Some family symbols were too sacred to change. "Sarah," he said quietly, "did you see the latest news?" "What news?" "The treatment developed here is being studied in the United States and Europe. Universities around the world want to understand how Brazilian medicinal plants can enhance genetic therapies." Sarah smiled. "Our great-grandmother would be proud. She always said that the plants here had special powers. And there's more," Edward continued. "I received a proposal from an international foundation. They want to fund similar research centers in other countries using the model we developed here." "What did you say?" "That I would only accept if you agreed to coordinate the project." Sarah looked at Ethan on stage, then at the auditorium full of people whose lives had been touched by her discovery. "Edward, I am just a public hospital nurse. You are much more than that. Sarah, you are a bridge between worlds, between traditional and modern medicine, between past and future, between science and love." When Ethan finished his performance, it was time for the official speeches. The mayor spoke about regional pride. The state health secretary mentioned medical innovation. But when it was Sarah's turn to speak, the auditorium fell completely silent. "I never imagined I would be here today," she began, her voice a little shaky. 3 years ago, I was just a desperate mother trying to save my son. I thought I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't give him everything he deserved." Sarah looked at Ethan, who was proudly smiling in the front row. "I discovered that sometimes we are special in ways we can't even imagine. That our family, our history, our blood, carry gifts that only reveal themselves when we need them the most." She took a deep breath before continuing. "This center is not just mine. It belongs to all the mothers who spent sleepless nights worrying with her children, to all the healthcare professionals who dedicate their lives to caring for others, to our great-grandmother Doris and all the women who came before us, keeping healing secrets in medicinal plant gardens." The audience was visibly moved. Sarah saw tears in the eyes of several people. "But mainly," she said, looking directly at Ethan, "this center belongs to the children, to those who have already been healed and to those who will still come here needing help. Because they remind us every day that it's worth fighting for, that it's worth believing, that it's worth loving." When Sarah finished her speech, the auditorium erupted in applause that lasted several minutes. Ethan ran to the stage and hugged his mother, whispering in her ear, "Mom, you saved the world." "No, my love," Sarah replied, embracing her son. "We saved each other." After the ceremony, as people mingled in the hospital garden, savoring the traditional sweets from the Johnson family, Sarah stepped away from the crowd for a moment. She needed time to absorb everything that had happened. Edward found her sitting on a bench under a tree, watching Ethan teach other children to play guitar. "About the international proposal," Edward said, sitting beside her. "You don't have to decide now." "Actually, I've already decided," Sarah replied. "I accept, but with one condition." "What?" "I want part of the project to be dedicated to training other nurses in integrative medicine. I want the knowledge to spread, for others to learn to combine modern science with traditional wisdom." Edward smiled. "Our father would be proud of both of us." Sarah looked at the golden watch on Edward's wrist. "You know, I never asked you. Do you have any more secrets about our family?" Edward laughed. "Just one. And this time it's good." "What?" "I found documents showing that our great-grandmother Doris wasn't just a herbalist. She was considered one of the best healers in the countryside of Indiana. Official doctors of the time secretly consulted her for difficult cases." Sarah shook her head in wonder. "The more I discover about our family, the more I understand that it was never a coincidence that I chose to be a nurse." "It wasn't a choice," Edward said. "It was destiny. You were born for this." As the sun began to set, Sarah looked around and saw everything that had been built. The modernized hospital, the research center, the healthy children playing, the families smiling. Edward by her side like a true brother. Ethan growing strong and talented. 3 years earlier, she was a lonely woman, haunted by feelings of inadequacy, struggling alone to save her son. Now, she was part of a family, the leader of a project that would transform lives around the world, and the mother of a boy who spreads joy wherever he goes. The journey had begun with fear and ended with hope. It had started with loneliness and ended with love. It had begun with a mother trying to save her son and ended with a woman saving hundreds of children. Sarah Johnson, nurse at Chicago General Hospital, had discovered that her life always had a greater purpose than she had imagined. And now, finally, she knew that she was, and always had been, more than enough. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until here, comment "I watched until here," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the final screen. It's very exciting.